Welcome to today's edition of Kansas Farm Bureau's Rural Report, which enlists experts to provide Kansas farmers and ranchers with the latest information about how COVID-19 is affecting agriculture. Rural Report is a special production of Kansas Farm Bureau in partnership with KFRM's Dwayne Taves and WIBW Radio's Greg Akagi. Today's topic will look at issues concerning the upcoming primary and general elections here in Kansas. Here to discuss today's topic is Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab. And Mr. Secretary, it is tough to believe that the primary election is less than 2 months away. And of course, all of our minds have been on the COVID-19 pandemic. So let me ask, what are some of the steps that your office has taken to make voting as safe as possible for this cycle?
Well, we've taken quite a few, Greg, and I appreciate the question because we want folks to know that it's going to be safe to go out and vote. It's safe to volunteer in the election and work as poll workers. And although there's a lot of fear in communities today of various things in the news, as it relates to the election, there's no reason to be scared to vote, no reason too scared to not participate. But some of the things we've done is we've gotten a lot of federal funds from the CARES Act. And so what we were able to do is use some of those funds to make sure we have Plexi Shields sent out for all the polling places, along with hand sanitizer, gloves. We're also, a lot of folks we're giving for those voting machines. They don't want to touch the screen. So we've provided stylists to voters that they can take home with them. They will be considered a single-use or single individual use stylist, so that, some counties are not even going to share the I voted sticker, which I think is kind of sad. I always like to wear those, but at least they'll have that stylist to say I voted, and they'll be able to take that home. For folks that still do the paper ballot, you'll still have that opportunity. Obviously, it's one ballot per person, so there's not going to be much transmission concerns there. But those are some of the issues we've been trying to make sure people know, that it's safe to vote and protect poll workers and protect voters. A lot of counties have put out advanced ballot applications, and we've seen an incredible uptick in requests for advanced ballots. And obviously, that's another safe way to vote if you want to vote at home and put that mail either return it directly to the clerk's office or drop it in the mail and have it sent to the post office.
We've heard several projections, and you talk about those advanced ballots, that we could be seeing a record number of those cast through the mail this year. So how do you ensure that those ballots are valid, and will it cause any delay in reporting results on Election Day?
Well, I'll start with the second one. It should not cause a delay in reporting results. What we found, what most people do is you have your poll workers in the clerk's office that count those ballots, and they're going to be opening those early and counting and verifying. On the security portion, obviously you have to apply to get an advanced mail ballot. That way you're expecting to get it. You don't have to have an excuse, but you still have to apply. So that way we have a signature from that application. When you get your ballot, you put it in an envelope, and you need to sign that envelope. We are going to match your signature from the application with the signature on the envelope, and we're also going to match it with your driver's license if you have one on file with the state of Kansas. And that's some of the security provisions that we put in place to make sure that that ballot was actually filled out by that voter and sent in. But I will encourage voters that, obviously we all get mail sometimes that actually belongs to the neighbor. I would encourage you, if you're concerned about delays because of the increase in volume through the post office, almost every clerk's office has a drop box, a secure drop box where you can drop that ballot off. And it's just as easy as dropping it off in the mail, except for instead of relying on the USPS to get your ballot there, you've actually gotten it there. The other thing we're doing to help folks is we have a ballot tracker that's through our website that you can go to, that once we've got your application, it'll tell you when your ballot was sent. It'll tell you whether or not they've received your ballot. So if you've mailed your ballot on August 1st and it's coming down to August 3rd and you haven't seen that they checked it, you may want to check with your election office to see if there's a holdup.
Yeah, and I was just going to ask that question. Is there a deadline, or is there like a drop dead date, so to speak, that you need to get that ballot and ensure it's returned on time to be counted?
Absolutely. That ballot needs to be postmarked by Election Day. So the primary election is August 4th this year. So any ballot that's postmarked August 5th is not going to count. And by August 7th, all ballots will have been counted. So even if one's been postmarked August 4th, but it comes in on the 8th or the 9th or the 10th, that ballot by law is not going to count, which is, again, why we say if you're a little bit concerned about the post office getting it there on time, you can directly hand it into your local election office.
You had mentioned the website. People can track that. What is that website they can go to?
It's sos.kansas.gov. And you can also go to kansas.gov and do a search for Secretary of State's office, and you can pull it up there if that's a little bit easier for folks to remember.
One other thing on that, Mr. Secretary, and I know this has been asked of you many times in talking about to ensure safety, that some would say maybe we need to go to an all mail-in ballot as far as the election is concerned, but you have stated that that is not going to be the case. Why is that?
Well, because I believe in more voting options, you get a better voter turnout. If you just say all of a sudden we're not going to have any polling places, I think that's bad for the election process, especially when it's not that high of a risk. It's going to be safer to go vote than it is to go to the local Walmart or a local liquor store. It's going to be a lot safer than that, simply because there's going to be less population going through there. Two, a lot of folks aren't used to voting by mail, so they're going to get a ballot in the mail they didn't ask for. They're going to think it's fake, so they're going to end up throwing it away, and then they're going to want to go vote on Election Day, and there's not going to be a polling place. The other concern is increased litigation. Dodge City, a lot of folks remember a few years back, they had one polling place and got sued. I can't imagine the lawsuits that would start if we eliminated every polling place across the state.
And Mr. Secretary, one of the ways you've advocated for more social distancing in voting is for counties to cover more of those polling places, but of course that also takes more poll workers. Do you have a sense of how county election officers are doing recruiting new workers to staff polling places?
Yeah, so one thing that we've been encouraging folks as we go around the state to speak is to make sure that they're going back to those experienced poll workers and say, hey, please continue to help. Then again, if you've been exposed to COVID, now's a great time to volunteer because you already have the antibodies. We've also been working through the state school board and local school boards on a program that was created out of our office last year called Student Serve. If you don't have to be 18 to work in an election. You can be 16 or 17. So we're asking that younger population to please participate. Schools are giving credit. If you're willing to write a little bit about what your day was on August 4th as you worked at the poll, they'll give you some school credit. Plus, counties are going to pay you. So, and I'm going to tell you, Greg, it's really a unique experience. I don't know about you, but I've got a 16-year-old son, and I just got a new phone, so it was just easier for me to hand it to him, and he updated it and set it up for me. It's really unique to see the retired population and the population that's grown up in a digital age work together to execute on an election with new technologies to ensure voter security.
Because, as many people know, typically if you go to a polling place, you're going to have 3, 4, or 5 people to man it. Even if it's a single place within a county, you have to have that personnel available.
Absolutely. And we want to make sure that it's not just our senior population that's participating, but that younger population as well. And again, we're not so concerned about the COVID exposure this August. We've noticed that with the warmer and more humid climate, that those numbers have a tendency, the rate goes down. But we're going to practice as if in August, as if there's going to be a second wave in November. So if we can recruit those folks in August and they learn how the election goes with that senior population, then in November, if that senior population needs to step aside because they have concerns, we have the experienced poll workers from the younger group.
This is such a different year. I mean, it's an understatement to say that, Mr. Secretary. But in so many aspects, like you mentioned, for what happens and the experiences you have during the primary election, that can be used to change in whatever aspect that you would need for that November general election?
Yes. So, like I said, this August, it should feel very much like a normal election. You're going to go up to, Kansas is one of the best states in the union as it relates to the short amount of time it takes to vote. And this year, I think it's going to be even quicker to vote because we have many people voting by advance by the mail or through the mail. So I think what you're going to find out is this election is going to be a real pleasant experience in August. In November, whatever we learned in August, we're going to execute on in November to continue to have that wonderful experience for voters.
Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab is joining us on this edition of Kansas Farm Bureau's Rural Report. Mr. Secretary, there is federal money available to help prepare for the special circumstances of this cycle. How much of that is Kansas eligible for, and what kinds of things is it being used for?
Well, that's a great question. Kansas received about $4.6 million for 2020 elections to mitigate any COVID concerns and hazards and exposure. So what we did is a little bit like what the feds did. They kind of prorated according to what size your state, number of voters you have, but also had a floor, like you're not going to get less than this amount. So every county was offered a minimum of $5,000 just to make sure that they had what they needed. But it wasn't just a blank check. They had to fill out an application of how they were going to use those dollars for COVID mitigation. And we encouraged them also not only use it for COVID mitigation for like single-use products like rubber gloves, but have a big picture. What can you use that will have a long-term footprint on the way you do elections? In case we run into this again, you've already mitigated it with what you did, with how you utilized those funds in the August primary. So they submitted those reports, and we authorized them so that they were able to spend those dollars. And then what we did is said, however, although that was your expected expense, send us the actual invoice, and we're going to do a direct reimbursement for what you actually spent. So if you ended up having to spend a little bit more than anticipated, we can work with that. If it's less, we're leveraging those dollars to maximize what we need so we can have enough left over in case there's any surprises coming up in November.
A couple of questions concerning what voters need to be prepared for. First off, with regards to social distancing and masks, are you asking voters to come in that they should wear a mask, and should they be prepared to have social distancing if there is a line where they go to their polling place?
Yeah, they do need to be prepared for social distancing unless the CDC guidelines change between now and then, which is always a possibility. If they're more comfortable wearing a mask and bringing their own mask, absolutely bring it. A lot of the counties are going to have some available. And again, we're going to have the shields available as well. But according to the CDC guidelines, if you're 6 feet apart, you really don't necessarily, for less than 10 minutes, you really don't need the mask. And again, this isn't Scott Schwab talking, this is the CDC guidelines. So if it takes more than 10 minutes to get through that line and vote, which rarely does it in Kansas, then yeah, you probably want to make sure you have your mask on, especially if you're going to be within 6 feet. But the way our county clerks are able to lay out the process of going through line and voting, I really don't think that's going to be as much of a concern. But again, if your comfort level is you want a mask, especially if you have a respiratory issue or you feel like you're at a more at-risk population, no one's going to be offended if you wear a mask. If that's your comfort level, by all means, that's what we want you to do, as long as you vote. Don't use, COVID-19 as an excuse to not vote.
Now, getting the social distancing out of the way, when they come to vote, this is just a reminder once again, they will need some form of ID to show the people at the polling place?
Absolutely. Kansas does have a voter ID law to make sure we have secure elections. So make sure you have your ID with you. And a lot of folks wonder, well, what does that mean? Well, for overall, the overwhelming majority of voters, it means your driver's license. However, if you don't have a driver's license, if you have a government-issued ID, for example, a student ID, if you're a student at one of our community colleges or our Division II or Division I schools, that student ID works as well, as long as it has your picture and your name. It doesn't even have to have an expiration date on it. The other thing that we want folks to know is if you're 65 or older and your ID is expired and your driver's license is expired, you can still use that. Those 65 and over, if there's an expiration date on it and you're over 65, the expiration date no longer matters. And then third thing, if you're in a position where you don't have an ID, but you want a photo ID, but you can't afford an ID, go to your local office and they can have you fill out a form that says, yes, I can't afford an ID, and one will be provided for you. So we want to secure elections without creating a hurdle that people can't obtain. So whether it's a free ID, that expired ID for your elderly population, or just a student ID, those will all work as valid forms of ID so that you can cast the ballot this year.
Mr. Secretary, as we wrap this up, with the date of the primary election on August 4th, Are there any other dates that people need to know about as we get closer to that date? And the same question about that with regards for fall dates when the general election rolls around.
Yeah, absolutely. July 14th is the deadline to register to vote, and we're asking everybody, please register to vote. It's not a difficult process, and so if you're a citizen of the state of Kansas, please register to vote. We've been pushing that ever since before we were elected. And advanced voting by mail and in-person voting may begin on July 15th. So if you want to get it out of the way, some counties are going to go ahead and have that in-person voting available on the 15th. If you're not sure, just check with your local county election office. And then those same dates, October 14th, obviously advanced voting and mail starts October 14th. And then the deadline to apply for an advanced mail ballot for that general election will be October 27th. So and our biggest concern isn't COVID. It is a concern. Our biggest concern is people don't want to vote because of it, and we're encouraging everybody to get out there and participate.
Mr. Secretary, very much appreciate you joining us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You all have a wonderful, safe week.
That is Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab, who joins us on the latest edition of Kansas Farm Bureau's Rural Report. Thanks for joining us.